My sister-in-law, freshly divorced, showed up on my doorstep with suitcases, demanding $50,000 from me for a glow-up to hunt for a millionaire. The moment I resisted, my mother-in-law slapped me across the face. But that was just the beginning. It was a late autumn afternoon in a suburb west of Boston. A crisp wind rustled through the maple trees, their leaves thinned to a delicate lace against the sky. The dry pavement glowed under a pale sun that poured like honey over the rooftops of our secluded enclave of stately homes. In a place like this, where life is viewed through gleaming picture windows and past wrought iron fences, it's easy to assume every home is peaceful, every soul content. From the outside, our house fit the picture perfectly. A handsome colonial, spacious and well-kept, with a small flower garden, an SUV and a sedan in the two-car garage, and the kitchen always fragrant with something simmering on the stove. Only those of us living inside knew that the more beautiful the house, the harder it is for a side to escape. My name is Claire, and I'm 33 years old. If you saw me at the grocery store, you'd probably think I was the kind of woman who had it all. My husband held a senior position at a major high-end furniture company. Our daughter was sweet and well-behaved, and we lived in a beautiful home. I never had to hustle or worry about making ends meet. Sometimes, I'd overhear people talking and have to stifle a laugh. "Claire is so lucky," they'd say. "All she does is stay home with her daughter, living like a queen." I'd just smile. People admire the beautiful curtains, but they rarely know about the drafts that seep through the window frames behind them. My husband is Daniel, 4 years my senior. He's tall, speaks with a measured confidence, and carries himself with the polished ease of a successful man. He knows how to navigate social situations, always making the right impression. When we first married, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Daniel wasn't a loud or boisterous man, nor was he reckless with money. He had a way of making you believe he was your rock. And for a woman, sometimes all it takes is a gentle word at the right moment, a hand offered at the right time, to believe the man before you is the one you can walk with for the rest of your life. But a marriage, I've learned, isn't a short path you can measure from one end. It's a long, winding road. Our daughter is Lily, and she's 6. She has big, clear eyes and a sensitive soul, quiet around strangers but a chattering sparrow at home. Lily loves to draw. She's more fascinated by a new box of crayons than any doll. At night, she has to sleep clutching a cream-colored teddy bear, its ears worn smooth from years of affection. On days when I was exhausted, just seeing her hunched over a piece of paper, carefully drawing a house with smoke curling from the chimney, would soothe my soul. She is the softest, most vulnerable part of my life, and the reason I endured so much for so long. I just wanted her to have a complete family, a home that, from the outside at least, looked stable and whole. Our household also included my mother-in-law, Eleanor, who is 62. She wasn't the type to yell or cause a scene in public. Her brand of cruelty was quieter, delivered through a sharp glance, the subtle curl of her lip, or a seemingly innocuous comment that, upon reflection, was designed to sting. She never said outright that she disliked me, but 7 years as her daughter-in-law was enough for me to understand. In her eyes, I was the girl from the wrong side of the tracks, someone who'd gotten lucky by marrying into this life and should therefore know her place to be grateful, to endure, and to fulfill her duties without complaint. She would often look me up and down, especially if I wore something a little too colorful, and say with a light, airy tone, "We're certainly dressed up for a day of managing the house." It sounded like a joke, but any woman who has lived with in-laws knows the weight of a joke like that. 7 years. It's not a lifetime, but it's not a short while either. It's long enough for a woman full of hope and love to transform into one who has learned to swallow her words. In the early years of our marriage, Daniel was more considerate. Whenever his mother's comments became too pointed, he'd step in with a placating word to keep the peace. But as time went on, that consideration wore away like leaves in late autumn. He grew accustomed to my silence. He began to see hot meals on the table, freshly ironed shirts in his closet, and a tidy home not as acts of love, but as the baseline of his existence. He started to believe that anything his mother said was constructive feedback, while any hurt I felt was just me being too sensitive. Once, I had a fever of 103. I was so weak I could barely stand, but I still had to force myself up to make a pot of soup because Eleanor insisted she couldn't stomach takeout. When Daniel came home from work, he found me collapsed on the sofa, my forehead damp with sweat. He only asked one question. "Did you take any medicine?" "Yes," I whispered. He grunted an okay, went to shower, and then sat down at the dinner table as if it were any other day. I remember lying there, my face turned into the cushions, a bitter thought surfacing in my mind. It turns out you can live under the same roof with someone, close enough to hear their every breath, yet your hearts can be as far apart as two opposite riverbanks. I'm not a confrontational person, nor do I enjoy airing our dirty laundry in public. There were days I'd endure Eleanor's barbs in silence, clear the table, wash the dishes, and then go to bed early, holding my daughter close. I used to think that yielding was the path to peace. My mother-in-law was aging. My husband was stressed from work. If I was the one to bend a little, what harm could it do? But life has a strange way of working. The more you retreat, the more others assume you have no boundaries. The more you endure, the more they believe you were made for enduring. Dinner in our house was usually served at 6:30 p.m. I cooked, I served, I cleared. I remembered which dishes Eleanor had to avoid for her health, which ones Lily loved, and which ones Daniel always reached for first. Yet, I was rarely the one praised. If the fish was seasoned perfectly, Daniel would say, "Well, she got it right today." If the soup was a little bland, Eleanor would set her bowl down with a sharp times clink asterisk, a sound that signaled a lecture was coming later. One evening, Lily was chattering about her day at kindergarten, halfway through a happy giggle. When Eleanor frowned, "Eat your food quietly. How can you swallow when you're talking so much?" Lily's eyes fell, and she went silent. My heart ached for her. All I could do was place a piece of chicken on her plate and gently rub her back under the table. On the surface, we were a picture of a respectable family, polite, orderly, with full attendance at the dinner table. A husband who went to work, a wife who stayed home, a grandmother who would occasionally walk her granddaughter to the school bus stop so the neighbors could see and remark, "What a blessed family." But only we knew that our rigid order was just a tablecloth thrown over a wobbly table. All it would take was one firm push, and everything would come crashing down. That evening, as I was taking down the laundry from the line on the back porch, the late autumn wind blew a light scarf around my arm. I felt a sudden, unusual heaviness in my chest. It wasn't because Eleanor had made a snide remark that morning about me buying an expensive brand of organic milk for Lily, calling it putting on airs. It wasn't entirely because Daniel had been leaving early and coming home late for 3 straight days, our conversations countable on one hand. It was a vague, unsettling feeling, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I looked up at the iron gate at the end of our driveway. The evening sun cast a sickly yellow light on the bars. In the kitchen, the pot of bone broth was simmering. On the small desk by the window, Lily had left an unfinished drawing. A house with 3 people holding hands, a perfectly round sun smiling down from above. Children always draw homes with such straight, peaceful lines. Only adults live inside them with hearts in constant turmoil, never knowing when a strong gust of wind will blow away everything they've tried so hard to preserve. Standing there in the yard as the porch lights flickered on, I understood something with painful clarity. Some marriages look like high walls and wide gates from the outside, but inside, they are colder than an empty room. And I, after 7 years of telling myself to endure, to be quiet, to hold it all together for my daughter, was finally growing tired. If someone were to ask me who in this world understands me best, I probably wouldn't say my husband. I'd say my father, Robert. My dad isn't the type to shower you with affectionate words or pull you into a hug to soothe your worries like in the movies. He's a classic, old-school New Englander, reserved, a man of few words, someone who values his integrity more than his image. If he gives his word, it's a bond. When he's silent, it usually means he's thinking several steps ahead. Outsiders might see him as stern, but we, his family, know that his strict demeanor is a frame for a very deep and caring heart. My maternal family valued propriety and good conduct. From a young age, I was taught that having money didn't give you the right to look down on others, and having an education didn't give you a license to be arrogant. You greet your elders when you enter a room, and you observe the dynamics at any table before you speak. My mother passed away when I was young, and as an only child, my father doted on me. But his love never translated into indulgence. He never taught me that a woman should depend on a man to live. Instead, he always said, "A woman can be gentle, but never weak. You can yield, but don't let people get used to the idea that you were made to be pushed around." The day I brought Daniel home to meet him, my father observed him for a long time. It wasn't a critical, judgmental stare. but the careful assessment of a man who has seen the world sizing up the person in front of him. That day, Daniel was on his best behavior. He was polite, knew to pour drinks, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke about his career with ambition. Sitting next to him, I felt a sense of relief, assuming my father was also starting to feel at ease. But later that evening, when it was just the two of us in the living room, he said something to me that I would remember for years to come. "Daniel is a smooth man," he said slowly. "Smooth isn't necessarily bad, but you have to remember, people who are too smooth are often very good at hiding their true selves." I was in love, so naturally, I didn't like hearing that. I argued with him, insisting that you marry for love, not after weighing someone like a business contract. My father didn't get angry or raise his voice. He just looked at me with an expression of both love and helplessness. "I won't stop you. It's your life to live. But I'll just remind you of one thing. A man who is good to you when you're dating may not be good to you when you're his wife." Before the wedding, everyone puts on their best face. It's only after you start living together that their true character emerges. I was still determined to marry Daniel. Looking back now, I think my father understood that day that his daughter would have to stumble on her own before she would believe him. He didn't set up elaborate tests of character or pretend to be poor to gauge Daniel's intentions. My father was far more practical than that. He always said that if you want to test someone's character, you do it honorably. Schemes and tricks only lead to ugliness. The only thing he did was to quietly prepare a way out for me, documented in black and white, secured by legal ownership, things that no one could argue with later. 3 months before I registered my marriage, the deed to the beautiful colonial house I now live in was finalized in my name. The titles for both cars in our garage, the SUV and the sedan, were also registered to me from the start. All the payments were made from a private trust fund my father had set up for me. He never boasted about it or used it as a threat against my in-laws. Even during the wedding, he kept things tasteful and discreet, never flaunting our family's wealth or doing anything that might make the other side feel insecure. He even gave me a stern warning. "I'm giving you a foundation to stand tall when you need to, not a weapon to hold over someone's head." The genius of my father was his ability to see 2 steps ahead, while I, at the time, could only see the one right in front of me. I truly loved Daniel, so I genuinely wanted to live like a normal woman. I didn't want my husband to feel like he'd married me for my family's money. And I certainly didn't want his family to be wary of me or treat me differently because they knew I had a powerful safety net. So, I chose to be quiet. I accepted their assumption that I was just a mild-mannered girl with no remarkable qualities other than being a decent homemaker. It wasn't just the house. Even Daniel's career advancement after we married had my father's hand in it, but it was done so discreetly that even Daniel himself likely believed it was all due to his own merit. My father didn't just hand him a top position. He introduced him to a subsidiary of his corporate network, in the right field, at a mid-level management position, giving him a platform to grow and a path to advance. How far he went, at least on paper and to the outside world, was still a result of Daniel's performance. My father kept his connection to the company quiet from most of the staff. He told me, for a man to stand on his own 2 feet, he needs to feel like he climbed the ladder himself. If you make the help too obvious, it can wound his pride and warp his character. When we were first married, I thought this was a beautiful way of doing things. I was secretly grateful to my father for preserving my husband's dignity while quietly looking out for his daughter. I once asked him why he didn't just tell Daniel, so he would understand my father's kindness. My dad just gave a faint smile. A man with true self-respect doesn't need to be reminded to be grateful. As for a man who only knows how to receive and assumes it's his due, telling him would be a waste of breath. At the time, I just nodded along. I never imagined how every one of those words would one day apply so perfectly to my own life. My in-laws knew nothing of this. In Eleanor's eyes, I was just a daughter-in-law whose luck far outweighed her worth. Somehow, I had managed to snag a husband with a good job and a beautiful house, freeing me from any financial worries. She never said it directly, but the sentiment was woven into everything she said. Once, while peeling an apple, she mused aloud, "Sometimes a woman doesn't need to be brilliant. She just needs to choose the right husband, and her life will be easy." It sounded like a casual observation, but every word was a dart aimed straight at me. I knew. Of course, I knew. I just didn't want to explain. To speak up would be like using my family's wealth to put them in their place. I didn't want to turn our marriage into a battle between 2 families. So, my silence, which started as a choice, became a habit. I voluntarily made myself smaller to keep the peace. I overlooked biting remarks to save Daniel from the awkward position of being caught between his mother and his wife. I told myself that being a daughter-in-law meant knowing when to step back, when to hold my tongue to keep the home warm. Many nights, lying next to my sleeping daughter, I still believed I was doing the right thing. What woman hasn't, at some point, thought that if she were just a little gentler, a little more yielding, people would eventually understand? But life often doesn't operate on the fair, gentle principles we imagine. Some people see your silence not as kindness, but as weakness. Some people see your willingness to yield not as a gift, but as an admission that you have nothing worth defending. When people are already inclined to look down on you, the quieter you are, the more brazenly they advance. That afternoon, after changing the sheets on Lily's bed, I sat down on the edge of her mattress. My hand unconsciously smoothed over the comforter, which still smelled of sunshine. My father's face suddenly appeared in my mind. I remembered what he told me before my wedding day. I can't live your life for you. But if the day ever comes when you have to choose between saving the appearance of a marriage and saving your own peace of mind, remember to choose the latter. The first time I heard that, I thought that day was a long way off, as distant as a summer storm you hear about but haven't felt. But sitting in the room that was no longer my daughter's, I suddenly realized that some things you think are far away have actually been standing quietly at your door for a long, long time. That Saturday afternoon, the Boston air had turned noticeably colder than the past few days. The wind whistled through the row of trees in front of our gate, a thin, sharp sound like someone dragging a fingernail across glass. I had just picked up Lily from her art class and was helping her with her backpack when I heard the clattering sound of rolling suitcase wheels on the driveway. The sound wasn't loud, but in the usual quiet of our neighborhood, it made me turn my head immediately. The iron gate swung open, and the person who stepped through was Jessica, Daniel's younger sister. She was wearing a tight-fitting, cream-colored knit dress with a short wool coat over it. Her hair was curled, but it was messier than usual. Her lipstick was smudged, her eyes were red and puffy. She was pulling two large suitcases, and a designer handbag I vaguely remembered her posting about on Instagram a few months ago was slung over her shoulder. The moment she saw her mother, Eleanor, coming out of the living room, Jessica let go of the suitcase handle and rushed forward, throwing herself into her mother's arms and bursting into tears. "Mom, I can't live like this anymore." The way she cried was expertly crafted to elicit pity. It wasn't a messy, out-of-control sob, but just choked up enough, just pitiful enough, to make anyone listening want to jump to her defense. Eleanor's face palled. She fumbled as she hugged her daughter, one hand stroking her back while the other guided her into the house. Her voice was urgent. "What happened? What did that Kevin do to you now? Tell me everything." I stood a few feet away, still holding Lily's jacket. My daughter looked from her aunt to me, confused, and pressed against my leg. The autumn chill in the yard, which moments ago was just the wind, was suddenly replaced by a different kind of cold. The cold of someone else's family drama about to be dumped into my home. Jessica sank onto the sofa, pulled a tissue from her purse to dab at her eyes, and launched into her story, as if she were afraid any delay would lessen its dramatic impact. She said her husband, Kevin, had been a different person for months, cold and distant when he came home from work, barely speaking to her. Worse, he was constantly criticizing her about money, her spending habits, her housekeeping. As she spoke, the tears flowed on cue, her voice trembling with a deep, bottomless sense of grievance. "I haven't done anything wrong. Every woman needs to take care of herself. But he keeps saying all I do is spend money, that I'm just a freeloader." Yesterday, he even smashed my new makeup palette on the floor. Hearing this, Eleanor slammed her hand on the arm of the sofa. "He dared? Does he think my daughter has nowhere to go? That ungrateful wretch." I quietly placed a glass of warm water on the coffee table in front of Jessica. She gave me a fleeting glance, "No thank you," and continued dabbing her eyes as she added more details. How she was disrespected by her in-laws. How her husband never stood up for her. How his family was critical and nosy. The story was perfectly constructed. An outsider would have easily believed she was a tragic heroine, pushed to the brink and forced to flee back to her mother. But for some reason, the more I listened, the more something felt off. I knew Jessica. She was not the type to suffer in silence. From the day I married into this family, I'd seen that my sister-in-law was a woman who knew how to enjoy life. She liked beautiful things, being pampered, and anything with a touch of glamour. She wasn't malicious by nature, but she operated from a me-first perspective. If they went out, it had to be to a trendy restaurant. If she took a photo, it had to be from her best angle. Even the handbag she bought had to be the latest at bag. Her wedding 3 years ago had been a grand affair. Her husband's family was well off, owning a manufacturing business in Connecticut. They weren't struggling. So for her to suddenly appear here, with 2 large suitcases and a face that looked like she'd been betrayed by the entire world, I couldn't help but feel a sense of skepticism. Perhaps I was the only one in that room calm enough to listen with my head and not my heart. I didn't interrupt. 7 years of being a daughter-in-law had taught me that there are times when the more you say, the more you're labeled as cold and unfeeling, especially when a distraught daughter is crying in her mother's arms. In that moment, whether she was right or wrong, anything an outsider like me said would be unwelcome. Eleanor pressed on. So, has he hit you? Did he kick you out? Jessica lowered her gaze, shook her head ever so slightly, and delivered a line that was heartbreakingly effective. He hasn't hit me, but he said living with me is suffocating. He said if I don't change, we should get a divorce to make things easier on him. At the word divorce, Eleanor became even more incensed, as if someone had thrown gasoline on a fire. She clutched her daughter's hand, her voice growing shrill. Divorce? What divorce? Does he think he can marry my daughter and then just say whatever he wants? You're staying right here with me. We'll see who dares to look down on a daughter of this house. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. It wasn't that I lacked sympathy for a woman going through marital problems. I'm a woman, too. The thought of an unhappy home is something anyone can relate to. But letting emotion completely cloud judgment is another matter entirely. Because in a family, everything has a practical consequence. To an outsider, staying with your mom for a while sounds simple. But for someone like me, living in that house, I knew it wasn't. Adding just one more person would disrupt everything. The living space, the daily routines, the rhythm of each family member's life. In our house, while large, didn't have a spare bedroom. The first floor had the living room, kitchen, and a bedroom for Eleanor, since her knee problems made climbing stairs difficult. The second floor had our master bedroom and Lily's room. The third floor was a combination home office and storage room, rarely used and not set up for long-term living. If Jessica were staying for a day or two, we could make a temporary arrangement work. But from the way Eleanor was talking, I knew she wasn't thinking in terms of days. I sat down in a nearby armchair and chose my words carefully. Eleanor, perhaps we could let Jessica stay for a few days to calm down, and then we can figure out the next steps. Maybe Daniel could call her husband and see what's going on. Sometimes, when tempers are high, things can get complicated. I spoke slowly, gently, as if I were barely touching the situation with my fingertips, knowing this was not the time to be assertive. But Eleanor turned to me, her eyes instantly hardening. It was a look I was all too familiar with. One that said any opinion I had that differed from hers automatically made me the problem. What are you trying to say? She asked, her voice quiet but cold. My daughter is in misery, and you're already trying to push her out? Before I could respond, Jessica, still with her head bowed, let out another perfectly timed sniffle, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She didn't have to say a word. Her pitiful posture was enough to transform my reasonable suggestion into a cold, calculated act. I had to explain myself. That's not what I meant. I just thought if we could talk to her husband's side first, maybe we could prevent things from escalating. Eleanor cut me off. Whether it escalates or not is their problem. This is her mother's house. If she wants to come home, she comes home. Are you saying we have no room for my own daughter? On the surface, it was a loving, irrefutable statement. But hidden within the phrase my own daughter was an unspoken clause that I was keenly aware of. I had never truly been included in the category of family. Lily, who had been standing beside me this whole time, not understanding the adult drama, tugged on my shirt and whispered, Mommy, is Aunt Jessica staying to play with me? I bent down and stroked her hair, unsure how to answer. Just then, Jessica looked up and managed a weak smile at her niece. Yes, sweetie, Auntie's just staying for a few days. Only I, looking at the 2 large suitcases parked neatly by the table, knew the truth. Someone carrying that much luggage wasn't planning on staying for just a few days. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, glinting off the metal handle of one suitcase. It still had an old, unremoved luggage tag on it. The other was bulging, packed to its limits. A clear thought formed in my mind. Someone truly in a panic, fleeing their home, usually just grabs a few essentials. Someone who arrives with two meticulously packed suitcases has likely been planning their exit for some time. But I said nothing. To voice that suspicion then would have only brought trouble upon myself. Eleanor was already on her feet, personally carrying her daughter's handbag, telling me to bring out some orange juice. She then turned to Jessica, assuring her to rest easy, that she would handle everything. Seeing her fuss over her own daughter didn't make me jealous. A mother's love is natural. What sent a chill down my spine was the knowledge that once Eleanor took charge of this situation, our home would no longer operate by its established rules. And any change driven by emotion, rather than reason, inevitably brings a cascade of problems. I carried a stack of freshly folded blankets upstairs. My heart is heavy as if I'd just been handed a stone to carry. Behind me, Eleanor's voice echoed from downstairs, interspersed with Jessica's choked, self-pitying narrative, rising and falling with just enough pathos to be convincing. Some people cry because they're truly in pain. Others cry to pave the way for the demands that will follow. I couldn't be sure which category my sister-in-law fell into just yet. But my intuition told me that this afternoon wasn't the moment the trouble began. It was merely the moment it walked through our door, rolled its suitcases across our polished floors, and sat down in our living room like a harbinger of chaos. They say when a guest arrives, you offer them tea or water. But some people walk in and immediately cease to consider themselves a guest. Standing at the top of the stairs, looking down, I suddenly felt that our home, which had already felt emotionally cramped, had just shrunk a little more. The next morning, just as I finished preparing Lily's oatmeal, my mother-in-law called me into the living room. Eleanor sat with her back ramrod straight, while Jessica sat beside her, her face still looking tear-stained, but her hair now neatly styled and her nails freshly polished. Standing before the two of them, I had a sinking feeling I knew what was coming. Eleanor got straight to the point. We need to rearrange things. With Jessica staying here, she needs a proper room. You'll clear out Lily's room for her. I froze. I tried to keep my voice respectful. Eleanor, that's Lily's own room. She's used to sleeping by herself, and all her school supplies and her drawing corner are in there. What if we clean up the room on the third floor for Jessica to use for now? I can help get it ready. She dismissed the idea instantly. The third floor is dusty, and she'd have to climb all those stairs. The poor girl is already miserable, and you want to stick her in some makeshift space. As for Lily, what's the harm in her sleeping with her parents for a while? Beside her, Jessica let out a sigh, the perfect embodiment of a long-suffering victim. I just need a decent place to rest and get my head straight, Claire. The word decent stuck in my throat. A 6-year-old child deserves a decent space. 2. I was about to argue further when the front door opened. Daniel was home. The sight of her son seemed to bolster Eleanor. She turned and spoke loudly. Daniel, talk to your wife. We're giving Lily's room to Jessica. Lily can move in with you too. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to ask a single question, to show some concern. But he just nodded, his voice indifferent. What's the big deal? It might be fun for her to sleep with us for a few days. I called his name softly. Daniel. She has a routine. Changing her room so suddenly might disrupt her sleep. She has school. He frowned. You're always overthinking things, Claire. Mom has made a decision. Let's just go along with it to keep the peace. The phrase keep the peace landed like a lid, silencing any further protest. I looked at my mother-in-law. She sat there, her expression cold and resolute, as if she had just decreed something utterly self-evident. I glanced at Jessica. The corner of her mouth curved up in a faint, fleeting smirk, before she quickly composed her face back into a mask of sorrow. I didn't argue anymore. 7 years of being a daughter-in-law had taught me that arguing at that moment would only make me the villain, while my daughter would still be the one forced to give up her space. I walked upstairs and opened the door to Lily's room. The scent of crayon wax and paper still hung in the air. On the wall was a drawing she had made, a tree with a big red heart and a house with 3 people holding hands. Looking at that drawing, a lump formed in my throat. Lily followed me in, clutching her teddy bear. Mommy, is Aunt Jessica going to sleep in my room? She asked quietly. I knelt down and forced a smile. Yes, honey. Auntie is sad right now, so she'll stay here for a little while. It'll be fun sleeping with Mommy and Daddy, okay? She didn't cry. She just bit her lip. Can I leave my box of watercolors here, Mommy? I nodded, but a chill ran through me. If the adults in this house considered taking her room a normal thing to do, How much respect would they have for her belongings? I remembered an old saying, one rotten apple spoils the barrel. One thoughtless person was enough to ruin the harmony of a home. I started packing, not according to what was practical, but according to Eleanor's instructions. All of Lily's things were to be moved to our bedroom, to give Jessica plenty of space. I gathered her books, notebooks, pencil cases, Lego sets, and her favorite small blanket, placing them in boxes. Each item I picked up felt like a piece of her childhood being torn away. Daniel came in to help for a few minutes before he was distracted by a phone call. As he walked past the boxes, he tossed a comment over his shoulder. "Don't act like we're moving out. It's only for a few days." I didn't reply. I just knew that to him, it was a few days, but to our daughter, it was her sanctuary, the place where she slept, dreamed, and grew. Lily stood timidly in the doorway, hugging her bear, watching me move each of her treasures out of her room. She was completely silent. Sometimes, a child's silence is more heartbreaking than their tears. By evening, her room was half empty. The drawing corner was bare. The bookshelf held only a few thin picture books. Eleanor had instructed me to leave a few things to keep a child's touch. I sank onto the edge of the bed, a sharp sting behind my eyes. A woman can endure people criticizing her, but watching her child's space being taken away is a pain that is almost impossible to bear. That night, Lily lay between me and Daniel. She faced me, her small hand clutching my shirt tightly. Daniel, scrolling on his phone, said in a placating tone, "Go to sleep, sweetie. Daddy will drive you to school in the morning." Lily didn't answer. I stroked her back, listening to her tiny breaths, my heart aching. She didn't voice it, but I knew what she was thinking. Asterisk. Why isn't my room anymore? Asterisk. That night, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. For 7 years, what had I been keeping the peace for? To preserve a home where my own child's rights could be casually sacrificed for someone else's comfort. My father's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, yielding in the right place is wisdom. Yielding in the wrong place is failing your own child. Asterisk. The first morning after Lily moved in with us, I woke up earlier than usual. It wasn't because I was more diligent, but because our daughter had tossed and turned all night. She wasn't used to her father's soft snoring, the dim light from our bedside lamp, or the feeling of sleeping in a borrowed space within her own home. In the middle of the night, she'd stir, her hands searching for her teddy bear, and then press herself against me, letting out a small, sad sigh as if she'd had a bad dream. I was heartbroken and anxious. Heartbroken because my child was being forced to endure adult complexities she couldn't possibly understand. Anxious because in the morning, she would have to go to school and act as if nothing was wrong. Lily woke up late, with small, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was tangled, her face groggy. I rushed to make her breakfast, warm her milk, check her backpack, and tie her hair into a neat ponytail. As I was tying her shoelaces, Eleanor appeared at our bedroom door, her voice flat, as if reading from a list. "After you drop off the child, come back and clean Jessica's room. She's not used to sleeping in a messy space." I looked up, about to say that I would clean it later, after I dropped Lily off and went to the market. But one look at her expression, and I swallowed my words. She hadn't asked if I was busy. She had given me an order. The feeling was so familiar that I sometimes forgot I was the daughter-in-law, not the live-in help. As I walked Lily to the car, she clutched my hand and asked in a tiny voice, "Mommy, can I go into my room to get a book this afternoon?" A lump formed in my throat. "Of course, sweetie. Whatever you want. Mommy will get it for you." As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I was lying, because I already understood that from now on, her room was no longer a place she could just walk into. It had become Aunt Jessica's room. The very thought was deflating. When I got home, I had just placed the grocery bags on the kitchen counter when I heard the sound of slippers shuffling down the stairs. Jessica emerged, still looking half asleep. She glanced around, as if searching for a servant, then said in a breezy tone, "Claire, I'll have an iced coffee. Light on the sugar, please." I stood there for a second, stunned. A house guest, ordering me around like a barista. I tried to remain calm. "Can you make it yourself?" "Everything is in the kitchen." Jessica pouted. "I'm just so exhausted. Besides, you're home anyway. What's the big deal?" I didn't answer. I turned back to the counter and got a glass, telling myself it wasn't worth fighting over a cup of coffee. But after I placed the drink in front of her, she took a sip, stirred it with a spoon, and then frowned. "You put too much ice in. It's going to get watery." "Eleanor." emerging from her room, overheard and immediately came to her defense. Her nerves are shot. Can't you be a little more considerate? When a woman is going through a hard time, she needs to be pampered. Standing in my own kitchen, I felt something inside me give way. Asterisk. She needs to be pampered asterisk, which means everyone around her has to make sacrifices. What about me? I'm a woman, too. I get tired, I have hard times. Why does no one ever say that I need to be pampered? That afternoon, I picked up Lily from school. The moment she stepped into the driveway, her eyes automatically darted up to the second-floor window, where her room used to be. She wasn't skipping and hopping like she usually did. She walked slowly, her eyes scanning her surroundings, as if afraid of making a sound in the wrong place. I led her up to our bedroom and helped her unpack her bag. She hesitated, then said, "Mommy, I want to get my watercolor set for my room." "Let Mommy get it for you," I said. She didn't argue, just lowered her head. A 6-year-old child, suddenly having to ask for permission to get her own belongings. The injustice of it felt like a needle prick to my heart. I walked to the door of Jessica's room and knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again. I heard the rustle of blankets. Then Jessica's sleepy, annoyed voice. "Who is it?" "It's Claire. I need to come in and get Lily's watercolor set." The door opened a crack. Jessica looked me up and down as if I were a major inconvenience. She stepped aside, yawning. "All this kid stuff is making my room so cluttered." I stepped inside. The room, which had always been neat and tidy, was now a mess of clothes, makeup, and handbags. Lily's drawing corner had been pushed aside. The large teddy bear that used to sit proudly on her bed was now shoved at the foot of it. I found the watercolor set, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from anger. Anger at myself for letting things get to this point. Dinner that evening was tense. Jessica sat at the table, picking at her food while scrolling through her phone, talking about her friends, new spas, and beautiful places to take photos, as if she were on a luxury retreat, not seeking refuge from a failed marriage. Eleanor beamed as she listened, constantly piling food onto her daughter's plate. Daniel ate a few bites, then got up to take a call, only instructing me, "Make sure Mom and Jess have enough to eat." I looked at the meal I had prepared, the fish I'd cooked, the soup I'd served, the vegetables I'd sautéed, and realized my role in this house had been reduced to that of a caterer. I was there to make sure everyone else was enough, while my own needs, and my daughter's, were never considered. That night, after I turned off the lights, Lily turned to me and whispered into my neck, "Mommy, I want to sleep in my room." I kissed her forehead and whispered back, "You will soon, sweetie." The words felt hollow. I knew that if I kept yielding, soon would become a promise lost to the wind. They say if you give someone an inch, they'll take a mile. I had taken one step back to keep the peace, but in return, I was left with the feeling that my daughter and I were being pushed further and further out of our own home. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just sad. I was starting to feel afraid. Not afraid of a fight, but afraid that one day, my daughter would grow up accustomed to being overlooked, thinking that this dysfunctional, lopsided family dynamic was normal. By the time Jessica had been at our house for a week, the misery on her face had all but vanished. In the beginning, she'd maintained a facade of sorrow. But with her mother there to shield her, she quickly reverted to her true self, accustomed to being served, entitled to being the priority. In the mornings, while I was busy getting Lily ready for school, Jessica wouldn't emerge until nearly 11 a.m. She'd saunter downstairs in a silk pajama set, see me wiping down the kitchen counters, and say breezily, "Claire, I'm hungry. Can you heat up some of that soup and fish from last night for me?" I replied, "The leftovers are in the fridge. You can heat them up yourself. I need to do Lily's laundry." Jessica just shrugged. "But I'm so tired." I heard the words "so tired," and just turned back to the kitchen in silence, the silence I had perfected as a reflex. Emboldened, Jessica started leaving her things everywhere. Lily's small desk became a cluttered vanity for her makeup. My daughter's bookshelf was cleared to make room for Jessica's designer bags. The upstairs bathroom constantly smelled of her overpowering perfume, her used towels thrown carelessly over the shower door. When I mentioned it, she snapped, "It's just a small thing. Why are you making such a big deal out of it?" My mother-in-law, overhearing, defended her. "Don't be so critical. The girl is heartbroken. Let her be comfortable." Comfortable meant I cleaned up after her. Comfortable meant my daughter's learning space was sacrificed. I suddenly understood the saying, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." But Eleanor's way of loving was different. It meant letting her daughter have whatever she wanted, and to hell with anyone who had to suffer for it. A few days later, she invited a friend over to talk. The two of them took over the living room, blasting the air conditioning and chatting and laughing loudly. Jessica ordered me to make tea and cut up a fruit platter, adding, "Make it look nice, Claire. My friend is picky." As I served them, I overheard them discussing handbags, spa treatments, and the best spots for Instagram photos. When Lily came home from school, she stood hesitantly at the bottom of the stairs, afraid to come down and make noise. My heart ached for her. This was her home, yet she had to tiptoe around as if she were a visitor. Even dinner became a performance of favoritism. If Jessica praised a dish, Eleanor would light up, piling more onto her plate. But when Lily mentioned she didn't like the taste of onions, Eleanor scowled. "So picky. You'll have a hard life if your mother keeps spoiling you." I felt a surge of anger, but kept my hands steady under the table, reminding myself not to explode in front of my daughter. Eleanor even started giving me a daily menu of Jessica's favorite foods, explaining that when you're sad, you need to be nourished. It was as if the daughter-in-law and granddaughter of the house existed solely to serve her daughter during her period of heartbreak. I was reminded of another saying: "The parents eat sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge." This misguided indulgence who would ultimately pay the price. Daniel continued to leave early and come home late. One evening, he had barely walked in the door when his mother began complaining. "Claire was being difficult with Jessica today." He turned to me, his voice weary. "Can you just be patient? A little peace and quiet is all I ask." "What about our daughter?" I asked back. He avoided my gaze. "She's a kid. She'll get used to it." His words sent a chill down my spine. Get used to it meant growing up in an environment where she had to yield, to be silent, to endure. One afternoon, I brought Lily home early from school. As I opened the door, I heard hushed voices from upstairs. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, still holding Lily's backpack, and listened. It was Jessica's voice, sweet as honey, but sharp as a needle. "Mom, are you sure about this? If I just stay like this, people will laugh at me." Eleanor's voice was lower, but firm. "If you want to hold your head high, you need to give them something to look at." Jessica continued, "I need to invest in myself, my skin, hair, teeth, then buy a few high-end pieces. Men these days, they look at the packaging before they look at the person." Eleanor hummed in agreement. "You just stay here and don't worry about a thing." I didn't go upstairs. I turned back to the kitchen, set down Lily's backpack, and tried to act as if I'd heard nothing. Lily ran over to show me a drawing, and I forced a smile, praising her while my heart felt as heavy as a stone. Asterisk. "You just stay here" times meant her stay was indefinite. It meant my daughter's room wasn't being borrowed temporarily. That night, as I washed the dishes, the cold water running over my hands was nothing compared to the chill in my chest. I began to understand that I wasn't just dealing with a thoughtless sister-in-law. I was up against a pre-established hierarchy where I was expected to serve and yield by default. I placed the last dish in the rack and saw my reflection in the dark kitchen window. The woman staring back was still me, but her eyes were different. They were no longer just sad. They held a quiet, simmering vigilance, the kind you develop when you know someone in your own home is plotting something. That evening, the Boston sky was heavy and gray, and a cold wind whistled through the cracks in the window frames. I cooked a simple, comforting dinner, hoping a quiet meal might spare Lily from hearing any more sharp words between the adults. But as soon as I set the food on the table, I could sense trouble brewing. Jessica was wearing a form-fitting sweater. Her makeup was perfectly applied, and her hair was styled in a half-updo. She sat across from me, constantly checking her reflection in her phone screen. Eleanor was beaming, placing a piece of meat on her daughter's plate and fussing over her as if she were a fragile doll. Jessica sighed dramatically, setting down her chopsticks. "When I think about the future, I just feel so hopeless. Once you're divorced, people look at you differently." I flinched at her phrasing. The worst thing for a woman is to be put in that box, as if her entire worth is defined by a single past event. But Jessica wasn't genuinely lamenting. The way she paused for effect and glanced at her mother felt like a well-rehearsed performance. Eleanor immediately played her part. "A woman's greatest asset is her beauty. You're still young. You have options. Men these days are practical. They look at the outside first. If you invest in yourself, there will be no shortage of men lining up for you." Jessica pulled out her phone, showed her mother a picture of someone, and said smoothly, "People say, if you want to start over, You have to invest in yourself. I was putting food on Lily's plate, and my hand paused midair. My daughter looked up at the adults, confused. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder, silently urging her to eat. A wave of revulsion washed over me. They were talking about a woman as if she were a product on a shelf, something that could be polished up to fetch a better price. Eleanor turned to me, her voice suddenly soft, but with an icy edge. Claire, as her sister-in-law, you need to support her. She's in a bad place. We should help her out. I remained polite. I want Jessica to be okay, of course. But how can I help? She set down her chopsticks and looked me straight in the eye. Arranged to give her $60,000. The atmosphere at the table froze. I thought I had misheard. I'm sorry. Did you say $60,000? I asked slowly. Jessica chimed in immediately, her words clear and practiced. It's not for frivolous things. It's an investment in a new life. A mommy makeover. Some dental work, hair, a new wardrobe, a decent handbag. I need to look the part before I can get back out there and network. Eleanor nodded approvingly. See, she has a plan. Helping her now is helping the family. I sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds. $60,000 was a lot of money. But what chilled me more than the amount was the way they said it, as if my money was a communal pot in the middle of the house that anyone could dip into at will. I looked over at Daniel. He was chewing slowly, his eyes fixed on his plate, avoiding eye contact with me and his mother. It was his classic move. Disengage and avoid taking a side. I addressed him directly. Daniel, what do you think? He let out a sigh. Jess is having a tough time. If we can help, we should. It's not like we're short on cash. His use of we made me want to laugh. Asterisk, we times weren't short on cash, but I was the one managing everything. My daughter was the one making sacrifices, and his mother and sister were the ones making the decisions. I tried to keep my voice steady. I don't agree. Eleanor's face hardened. What do you mean? You don't agree? You've lived a comfortable life for years. Now that your sister-in-law needs something, you're going to be stingy? Jessica sneered, her voice dripping with acid. You sit at home all day, living a life of luxury. Helping me out one time isn't going to kill you. I looked at Jessica and saw clearly that this wasn't a request. It was a demand. I spoke slowly, enunciating each word to keep my voice from shaking. If you want to get back on your feet, you need to do it on your own 2 feet. I am not going to give you money for plastic surgery and designer clothes so you can go husband hunting. Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. Don't you take that condescending tone with me. Just because you married into this family doesn't give you the right to lecture us. Daniel frowned. Claire, don't make this a big deal. It's only $60,000. I turned to my husband and saw a vast, empty space between us. Only, the word was so light on his lips. But it landed in my heart like a stone. I remembered the old saying. It's not the gift, but the thought that counts. Here, they didn't just want the gift. They wanted me to offer it up willingly, with a smile on my face. I stood up and picked up Lily's half-eaten bowl of rice. You're done, sweetie. Let's go upstairs. My daughter looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't want her to hear any more. As I walked away, Eleanor's voice, cold and sharp, followed me. A stingy, heartless woman will lose her husband sooner or later. I carried my daughter up the stairs, one clear thought in my mind. The moment I said no, I was no longer the compliant, easygoing daughter-in-law in their eyes. I had become an obstacle. And when you're an obstacle, the things they try to take from you will no longer be limited to just money. I took Lily upstairs, coaxed her to finish her dinner, and helped her brush her teeth. She was so well-behaved, which only made my heart ache more. She didn't ask any questions, just watched me with a searching look, as if trying to gauge if her mother was okay. When she was finally asleep, clutching her teddy bear, I stepped out onto the balcony, closing the glass door behind me so my sighs wouldn't disturb her. Outside, the wind was picking up, swirling the dry leaves in the yard below into small eddies. I leaned against the railing, looking out at the warm, yellow lights of the neighboring houses, and felt a profound coldness inside me. It wasn't just about the dinner. For the first time, I saw with absolute clarity that in this house, my sacrifices were not just unappreciated, they were expected. It was as if I was born to provide, and they were born to receive. I went back inside. Daniel was already in the room. He closed the door, his voice tired. Why did you have to be so dramatic? Mom and Jess have a point. Jess is hurting. Helping her out would be a good deed. I looked at my husband. not raising my voice, just asking, "Did you hear Jessica say, with her own mouth, that the money was for a breast augmentation, designer clothes, and photo shoots to find a new man?" He avoided my eyes. You always see the negative side of things. She just needs some confidence to get back out there. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Confidence paid for by me? And what about my confidence? Where do I get that? From being treated like an ATM in this house. He was getting annoyed. What kind of talk is that? I work to support this entire family. What's the big deal if you help my sister a little? His words, "I support this entire family," landed like a slap. I froze. I never wanted to bring up money, and I certainly never wanted to use my family's resources as leverage. But hearing him say that, I understood. He truly believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that everything I had, everything I was because of him. My voice, when I spoke, was still calm, but it had a new, cold edge. "You support this family with what money? How much do you transfer to me each month for our daughter, for groceries, for utilities, for doctor's visits? Or do you support us by simply coming home to a cooked meal and signing papers for a house you think is yours?" He scowled. "Don't exaggerate. I don't want to fight." "I don't either," I sighed. "But I need to be clear. I am not giving them the $60,000. Not because I'm stingy, but because I will not accept the way your mother and sister treat my money as their entitlement." He was silent for a moment, then said something that sent a chill down my spine. "You've had a peaceful life in this house for years. Helping my sister now is no big deal. Don't make things difficult." Difficult? So what he was afraid of wasn't his wife's dignity being trampled or his daughter's feelings being hurt. He was afraid of the discomfort of being caught between his mother and his wife. And he had chosen the easiest path, forcing his wife to back down. Before I could say more, the bedroom door flew open. Eleanor stood there, her face a cold mask. "What are you two whispering about in here for so long?" Before Daniel could answer, she looked directly at me. "Don't even think about it. I'll say it plainly. This family has its own way of doing things. My daughter is suffering. If you won't help her, fine, but don't you dare lecture her. A woman with such a narrow heart will bring misery upon herself." The phrase narrow heart made my own heart pound. I replied, still using the polite tone of a daughter-in-law, "I'm not being narrow-minded. I simply don't agree to using my money for things that are wrong." Jessica appeared in the hallway behind her, her face petulant, but her eyes sharp. "The way you say wrong is so dramatic. You act like you're so perfect. What would you have if you weren't living in this house, supported by my brother?" I turned to my sister-in-law. She said it so casually, but her words were like a thin, sharp blade to my heart. I suddenly understood. They didn't just want my money. They wanted me to admit that I was living on their charity, which would then give them the right to demand whatever they wanted. I spoke slowly, deliberately. "Jessica, don't talk like that in front of your niece." She smirked. "She'll find out sooner or later. In life, you have to know your place. Know your place." The phrase made me tremble with suppressed rage, but I held it in. I didn't want Lily to wake up to her mother screaming. I just looked at Eleanor. "Eleanor, let me say one thing. I have been your daughter-in-law for 7 years. I have never let you go without a hot meal, never let this house be a mess. But I am not obligated to fund Jessica's cosmetic surgery and designer wardrobe. I will not do it." Eleanor let out a cold, sharp laugh. "Fine. Then don't blame this family for being cold to you from now on." Daniel stood beside me, silent as a shadow. His silence was more painful than any insult, because it told me he was not on my side. He was tacitly allowing his mother and sister to speak to his wife this way. That night, I lay in bed, holding Lily. I could hear her steady breathing, but my own eyes were wide open in the darkness. I thought about the old saying, "Be kind and you will receive kindness." I had been kind. I had been patient. I had tried to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law. But some people don't know when to stop. They only stop when they are stopped. Asterisk, listeners. If you were in my shoes, what would you do when your mother-in-law and sister-in-law treated your money as their own, and your husband just told you to endure it for the sake of peace? If you have a moment, please leave a like to support the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you listen to the end, there's a surprise that will shock many of you. Because what happened next wasn't just about money. It would strike at the deepest fear of any mother. The question was, could I still protect my daughter's peace in our own home? Asterisk. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen early. Eleanor was already sitting at the table, her face like stone. Jessica came down a moment later, shot me a dirty look, and turned away. I opened the pantry to get the oatmeal, my movements quiet and deliberate. In the silent kitchen, I could hear the sound of running water, the soft scrape of the scoop against the bottom of the container, and the growth of a very real certainty in my heart. From this day forward, there was no more retreating into silence. That afternoon, I picked Lily up from school under a pale, late-autumn sun. She was clutching a folder of drawings to her chest, chattering away about how her teacher had praised her work for having so much soul. Listening to her, my heart softened a little, like a parched throat receiving a cool glass of water. She told me she had gotten a good grade on one piece and wanted to use her new watercolor set to add more color to it before showing it off at school the next day. I remember I left my watercolors in my room. "Mommy," she said, her eyes shining. I flinched at the phrase "my room." I was about to remind her not to run straight there, but seeing the excitement on her face, my resolve wavered. "Just take it easy, sweetie. Let Mommy put your backpack away first," I said. The moment we walked through the front door, I was hit by the cloying smell of perfume mixed with the chemical scent of nail polish. A sense of unease crept over me. Before I could process it, Lily had kicked off her shoes and dashed upstairs. I followed with her backpack, a knot in my stomach, but I tried to reassure myself. Asterisk. She'll just grab her paints and come right back out. Asterisk. A few seconds later, a small voice called out from upstairs. It wasn't a happy cry of showing off a drawing. It was a choked, distressed call. "Mommy!" I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding. The door to the room was wide open. Lily was standing frozen in the doorway, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. On the bed, Jessica was lounging, one leg tucked under her, the other dangling off the side. In front of her was my daughter's watercolor set. The lid was open, and several pans of color were scattered on the floor. She was using one of Lily's small paintbrushes to apply red polish to her toenails, the color bleeding onto her skin like a fresh wound. The drawing Lily was so proud of was still clutched in her hand, trembling. She looked from the ruined paint set to her aunt's feet, her eyes welling up with tears. Still, she tried to speak, her voice small. "Auntie, that's my paint set. Mommy just bought it for me. Can I have it back, please?" Jessica looked up at her niece as if she were an annoying insect. She sneered. "It's just some cheap paint. What's the big deal? Kids these days are so spoiled." Lily sniffled. But you spilled it, and you broke my brush." I bent down and picked up the brush. It was broken. The bristles were crushed and matted together, and the floor was stained with spilled watercolor. I heard myself swallow hard. It was a small thing, but it was my daughter's joy, something she cherished, the last little corner of her world that remained after her room had been taken from her. Before I could speak, Jessica tossed another brush on the floor, her voice sharp. "What are you crying for? It's cheap junk." Just then, Eleanor came up the stairs. She saw Lily standing there, crying, and immediately frowned. "What is it now?" Before I could open my mouth, Jessica spoke quickly. "She's making a scene, Mom. I just borrowed her paint set for a minute to do my nails, and she's crying like someone died." Eleanor turned on Lily. "That's enough out of you. Your aunt is going through a hard time. Don't you know how to share?" Lily let out a sob, looking at her grandmother as if for help. Her voice broke. I just wanted it back." "She broke it." Eleanor's voice was harsh. "If it's broken, your mother will buy you a new one. Stop being so possessive over a little toy." I felt something inside me snap, like a thin cord pulled too tight. I stood up straight and faced her. This time, my voice was not soft. "Eleanor, a child's possessions are still their own. To take them without asking, break them, and then scold the child for it is wrong." Eleanor froze for a second, then her face flushed with anger. "What did you just say? Are you teaching me how to be a grandmother?" Jessica immediately jumped up, hands on her hips. "Wow, Claire, you sound so self-righteous. As if you have any authority in this house." I looked directly at Jessica. "Jessica, you are a guest in this house, and you should act like one. You can be sad. You can rest." I haven't said a word. "But you took my daughter's things without asking. You broke them, and then you yelled at her. Where, exactly, do you think you are in the right?" Jessica's eyes widened. "It's a cheap little toy. You're stingy with your money, and now you're stingy with a box of paints?" That last comment made Lily flinch. She tugged on my sleeve, sobbing. "Mommy, please, stop talking." I turned and wrapped my arms around her. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just crying over her paints. She was scared. Scared of the fighting, of the loud adult voices, of the constant feeling that she was always the one who had to give in. I took a deep breath and spoke to Eleanor, my voice slow, trying to maintain one last shred of respect. Eleanor, I'm not arguing to win. I just want you to understand that she is a child and she deserves to be respected. You can defend Jessica all you want, but please, do not make my daughter out to be the one at fault. Eleanor laughed coldly. I don't need you to teach me anything. In this house, what I say goes. If she's misbehaving, it's because her mother spoils her. I held Lily, feeling her tremble like a small, trapped bird. I bent down and gathered the broken paint set, the sharp edges of the plastic digging into my fingers. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I had been silent to keep the peace. I had been silent because I was afraid of my daughter growing up without a father. But today, watching my child be blamed and shamed right in front of me, I understood. If I continued to be silent, she would learn a terrible lesson, that people could take what was hers, hurt her, and then demand her silence. I carried Lily out of the room without another word. Behind me, I could hear Jessica muttering and Eleanor's voice rising in a tirade. I didn't look back. I just walked straight to my room, closed the door, and sat down beside my daughter. Lily hugged her teddy bear, her sobs finally subsiding. Mommy, was I bad? My throat was so tight, it took me a moment to speak. No, sweetie, you were not bad. You just wanted to protect your things. That is always the right thing to do. I wiped her tears with a tissue and looked down at my own hand, stained with red paint. That red wasn't just watercolor. It was like a mark, showing a boundary that had been crossed. And for the first time, a new resolve formed in my heart. From now on, they could do whatever they wanted, but they would not touch my daughter again. That night, I didn't go down for dinner. I gave Lily a bath and made her some soup, which we ate in our room. As she ate, she kept looking up at me, as if to make sure I was still okay. I smiled at her, but it was a thin, fragile smile. When she finally fell asleep, clutching her bear, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the broken watercolor set. The cracked pans of color, the snapped brush, the stains on the bottom of the box. They were such small, insignificant things, yet they felt like a wound in my heart. A little after 9 p.m., Daniel pushed open the bedroom door. He didn't ask if Lily was asleep or why my hand was stained with paint. He leaned against the dresser, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and irritation. What did you do to set Mom and Jess off like that? I looked at my husband and answered slowly. You just take their word for it. Did you even ask Lily what happened? He frowned. What's there to ask? It's just a box of paints, and you're making a federal case out of it. I laughed, but it was a cold, bitter sound. To you, it's a box of paints. To her, it's hers. It's her joy. Did you not see her standing there, trembling, afraid to even speak? Daniel sighed. So she got told off a little. It's not the end of the world. You spoil her, that's why she's so sensitive. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to speak quietly so as not to wake our daughter. Sensitive in what way? She asked for her things back, because her aunt broke them. You call that being sensitive? He paused, then delivered a line that knocked the wind out of me. Jess is going through a hard time. Don't hold it against her. Mom was just trying to protect her daughter. I looked up at him. Protect her daughter? So, she gets to take my daughter's room, use her things, and then yell at her? What about her granddaughter? Have you once asked how our daughter feels about any of this? He was getting visibly angry now. Stop dragging Lily into this. I told you, just yield a little to keep the peace. If you keep being stubborn, it just makes everything chaotic. I looked at him and suddenly felt a vast emptiness. His idea of peace was my silence. My daughter's silence. Also, his mother and sister could do as they pleased. If that was peace, it was the peace of a lid on a boiling pot, quiet on the surface, but ready to explode underneath. His voice grew louder. What's with that tone? I'm your husband. Don't be disrespectful. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked a question that had been sitting in my heart for 7 years. You tell me not to be disrespectful. Have you ever once told your mother not to be cruel to me? He froze, his eyes darting away like someone who couldn't face the truth. After a moment, he answered stiffly. You're the daughter-in-law. Whatever Mom says, you should just let it go. Arguing just embarrasses me. The word embarrasses made me let out a long, weary sigh. So that was it. In this marriage, the thing he feared most wasn't losing his wife or his daughter. It was losing face. He wanted me to be compliant so he could have an easy life, not because he wanted me to be happy. I asked another question, my voice so calm it surprised even me. If one day our daughter is treated unfairly, will you also tell her to just let it go to protect the family's image? He scowled. Don't be ridiculous. She's just a kid. What does she know? She knows pain, I replied. She knows injustice, she knows fear, and she knows who will protect her. That seemed to wound his pride. He took a step forward, his voice rising. Don't you lecture me on how to be a father. I looked at my husband and felt a profound weariness. It wasn't the weariness of arguing, but the weariness of realizing I was talking to a man who only wanted to win, not to understand. I spoke softly. I'm not lecturing you. I'm just telling you what I see. He was silent for a few seconds, then turned away. I don't want to argue. If you keep acting like this, my mother will only dislike you more, and Jessica will only be here for a while. Just be patient. I heard his words and tasted bitterness. They had taken my daughter's room for a week, called me stingy for not handing over a fortune, and yelled at my child for protecting her own property. And in my husband's mouth, all of that was reduced to just be patient. I looked at Lily sleeping, her eyelashes fluttering as if she were still troubled. In that moment, for the first time, I thought, asterisk, if I left, would my daughter finally stop being afraid? Asterisk. But another thought immediately followed. Asterisk. If we divorce, she'll grow up without a father. People will talk. Holidays and birthdays will be split in two. Asterisk. I was afraid of hurting her, of putting her in a position where she'd be torn between us. I turned back to Daniel, my voice barely a whisper. Do you love our daughter? He answered quickly. Of course I do. I nodded. Then do one thing for me. Stop telling me and our daughter to yield for the sake of peace when we are the only ones paying the price. If this house is ever going to be peaceful, it has to be built on fairness, not on our silence. Daniel didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing heavily, then turned and walked out. The door closed behind him, not slammed, but with enough finality to let me know that some words, no matter how quietly spoken, can still create a crack. That night, I lay next to my daughter, staring into the darkness that felt as thick as a blanket over the room. I remembered an old proverb. When the husband is angry, the wife should soften her words. When the rice boils over, lower the fire. But I also knew that some pots don't boil over because the fire is too high. They boil over because someone keeps adding salt and telling you to swallow it. I pulled Lily closer. In the rhythm of her steady breathing, I heard my own heart. It was no longer the heartbeat of a woman just trying to hold a family together. It was the heartbeat of a mother learning how to stand up straight. On Sunday morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was looking forward to the day, but because the atmosphere in the house had become suffocating. I just wanted a few moments of quiet to breathe while everyone else was still asleep. I made a pot of tea and stood by the window, looking out at our small yard. Fallen leaves were scattered at the base of the bougainvillea, and the dry wind made the window pane rattle. Late autumn in New England was like that. Beautiful, but melancholic. Quiet, but cold. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. The name Sarah lit up the screen. I paused. Sarah was my best friend from college. She had moved to London years ago and, while she came back to the States occasionally, she rarely visited without notice. I answered the phone, and before I could even express my surprise, I heard her cheerful voice. Claire, I'm back in town. Can you meet me this afternoon? I glanced around the quiet house. Eleanor and Jessica were still in their rooms. Daniel had left early for a meeting with a client. Lily was in her corner of our room, quietly drawing, as silent as a little mouse. Okay, I whispered. I can get out for a bit. Where are you? She gave me the address of a small, quiet cafe tucked away in a side street, the kind of place designed for peaceful, uninterrupted conversation. After I hung up, a strange feeling washed over me, like someone who had been sitting in a stuffy, closed room for too long suddenly seeing a door crack open. I got ready quickly, told Lily I was going to meet a friend and that she needed to stay with Grandma. She nodded, but her eyes followed me to the door, as if she were afraid I wouldn't come back. I bent down and kissed her forehead. I'll only be gone a little while. You be a good girl, okay? As I said it, I realized I was the one who needed to hear those words. The cafe was lush with plants, and soft music played in the background. Sarah was sitting at a corner table, wearing a simple white blouse, her hair cut in a chic, short style. She still wore the same old watch she'd had in college. As soon as she saw me, she stood up and pulled me into a hug, a long, tight hug, as if she were afraid I might break. You've gotten so thin, she said, looking me over from head to toe. I forced a smile. Just the usual. Juggling a kid, managing a house. Sarah didn't smile back. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice a mix of concern and sharpness. Claire, don't give me that managing a house line, as if it's the only acceptable reason for you to look so worn out. I fell silent. I was usually so good at deflecting direct questions, but with Sarah, it was always impossible to hide. She had known me when my laugh was loud and uninhibited, when I dared to wear whatever I wanted, when I said what I thought. She knew I once dreamed of opening a small design studio, that I used to stay up late sketching, my eyes bright with passion. Now, sitting across from her, I felt like a different person, a woman who had to weigh every single word before she spoke. Sarah didn't immediately ask about my in-laws. She talked about her life in London, her work, the weather, our old friends. But the more she talked, the more I felt a chasm opening up between us, not a geographical one, but the distance between a person who was still living her own life and one who hadn't dared to claim her own life for a long time. After a while, she set down her cup, her voice softer. Are you okay? I was about to say, I'm fine. I'd used that phrase so often it had lost all meaning. But today, for some reason, I couldn't get the words out. I just shook my head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Sarah's expression softened. I knew it. Claire, you're not the type of person who just fades into the background. I managed a watery smile. I don't even know when I became like this. She leaned forward, speaking slowly. It started the first time you yielded, and they weren't grateful. Then you yielded a second time, and they assumed you were supposed to. It just keeps going, until their expectation becomes your habit, and your habit becomes your fate. Her words landed like a key, turning a lock deep inside me. I took a deep breath, hearing my own heartbeat. People say you can't fight fate, but they also say you have to stand up for yourself. I had been so busy loving everyone else that I had forgotten to stand up for me. Sarah opened her handbag and took out a long, beautifully wrapped gift box. I got this for you. I quickly waved my hands. Oh no, you didn't have to. Just having you here is enough. She pushed the box toward me, her tone firm. Take it. This isn't a gift for the stay-at-home mom or the wealthy man's wife. It's for the Claire I knew when we were 20. I opened the box. Inside was a silk dress the color of jade green. The fabric was cool and smooth to the touch. The cut was simple but elegant, not flashy or loud, but with an understated sophistication that you only appreciated up close. As I touched the fabric, I felt a familiar sting behind my eyes. Stop living like you're borrowing a space in your own life, Sarah said. This dress won't make you richer, but I hope it reminds you that you once knew how beautiful you were in your own way. I bowed my head, trying to hide the tears that were threatening to fall. I hated crying in public, hated the thought of people staring. But Sarah reached across the table, took my hand, and whispered, "What are you crying for? Tears are meant to be shed, not to be trampled on." I laughed through my tears. Classic Sarah, always knowing exactly what to say. I took a deep breath and carefully folded the dress, placing it back in the box, as if I were tucking away a piece of my self-respect that someone had just returned to me. On the drive home, I held the box in my lap. The wind outside was chilly, but I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. It wasn't the warmth of knowing everything was suddenly okay, but the warmth of knowing I wasn't alone. Someone still remembered who I was. Someone still saw how tired I had become. I walked through the familiar iron gate. The house looked the same, large, bright, beautiful, but I knew that today, something inside me had shifted. I now carried a reminder. Before I was anyone's wife, anyone's daughter-in-law, or anyone's mother, I was Claire. And if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. On Saturday afternoon, the weather turned. Gray clouds rolled in, looking as if someone had smudged charcoal across the sky. I had just come back from the market, my hands full of groceries, my mind already planning dinner, something simple that Lily would eat without a fuss. She hadn't been sleeping well the past few nights, and I wanted to avoid any more tense mealtime conversations. As I walked into my bedroom, I immediately sensed that something was wrong. The door to my closet was slightly ajar. I'm meticulous about closing doors. Years, as a homemaker, had ingrained habits of order in me. I knew where everything was, especially my personal items. I stopped, my heart starting to beat a little faster. There was a strange, unsettling feeling in the air, as if the room's quiet had been disturbed. I walked over and pulled the closet door open. The hangers were all in a row, but in the separate section at the back, Where I had carefully hung the jade green silk dress from Sarah, there was an empty space. I quickly pushed aside other clothes, checking again, not wanting to believe my eyes. It was gone. I looked at the bottom of the closet, checked my box of accessories. Still nothing. I stood there, my hand on the cool wood of the closet door, a chill running down my spine. It was just a dress, but it was the first real gift I had received in years. I had put it away so carefully, not because it was expensive, but because I was afraid of losing the feeling that came with it, the feeling of being seen and valued. I was about to go downstairs and ask when I heard a car pull into the driveway, followed by the clack of heels on the pavement. Before I could move, my bedroom door swung open. It was Jessica, and she was wearing my dress. But it wasn't the same dress I had taken out of the box. A large, dark red wine stain marred the front. The hem was torn, a long rip that left the delicate silk threads frayed and ragged, as if it had been snagged and yanked violently. Jessica didn't even try to hide it. She tossed her hair back and looked at me with an air of complete nonchalance. "Oh, you're back," she said, as if she were wearing her own clothes. I heard my own voice, slow and clear. "Who gave you permission to take that dress?" She shrugged. "I just borrowed it. It's just a dress, Claire. Don't be so dramatic." I took a step forward, my eyes fixed on the wine stain and the tear, a hot anger rising in me. "You borrowed it, and you stained and ripped it like this?" Jessica glanced down at the dress, then dismissed it with a wave of her hand. It was a crowded party. Someone bumped into me with their drink. The tear must have caught on something. "What's the big deal? I'll buy you a new one." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And how will you buy me a new one? With whose money? Or are you planning on borrowing that from me, too?" Her face soured. "Why do you have to be so difficult?" Just then, Eleanor came up the stairs. She saw her daughter in the dress, and her face lit up for a moment before she noticed me standing in the doorway, her expression immediately turning sour. "What are you doing? Blocking the way?" she demanded. I didn't beat around the bush. "Eleanor, did you and Jessica go into my room, open my closet, and take my dress without my permission?" Eleanor sneered. "So what if we did? Is anything in this house truly private?" Your sister was feeling down. She needed something decent to wear to see her friends and lift her spirits. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I looked at my mother-in-law, the feeling of disbelief and familiarity washing over me at the same time. I spoke slowly. "Eleanor, our bedroom is a private space. To enter without asking and take my things without permission is not right." Eleanor's voice grew harsh. "Don't you lecture me. I am your mother-in-law. I can enter my son's house whenever I please. I don't need your permission." I turned and saw Daniel at the end of the hallway. He had just gotten home from work and must have heard most of the exchange. I waited for him to say something, just one word to acknowledge that taking things without asking was wrong. But he just looked at the wine stain on the dress, then at me, his voice filled with exasperation. "Why are you always so dramatic, Claire? Jessica wore it by mistake. If it's torn, we'll buy another one." I felt my throat tighten. "Did you hear what I said? It's not about whether the dress was expensive. It's about them coming into our room without permission. They went through my closet and took my things. You think that's normal?" He frowned. "Mom already told you. Jess is going through a hard time. Stop picking on every little thing. This is a family, not a hotel with private rooms." I looked at my husband and saw it clearly. To him, anything that was mine could be considered ours, and my privacy was a luxury I wasn't entitled to. Suddenly, Jessica burst into tears, a quick, well-timed performance. "I already said I'd replace it. Why are you trying to humiliate me like this? My life is already ruined." Eleanor immediately rushed to her daughter's side, turning to scold me. "You see, the poor girl is in pain, and you're interrogating her like a criminal. You couldn't even share one dress." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Share? You told me to share my daughter's room, to share my money, and now to share my private belongings from my own bedroom. How much more do you want me to share?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "How dare you speak to me like that?" I didn't back down. My voice was still even, but each word was sharp and clear. "I dare because I've had enough. If a stranger came into our house and took something, we call it theft. When a family member comes into your private room and takes your things, what is it called? A privilege? Or is it still theft, just wrapped in the excuse of family?" The air grew thick with tension. Jessica stopped crying, a flash of anger in her eyes. Eleanor's face turned a deep red. her hands trembling as if she wanted to strike me, but was held back by some last shred of decorum. "Who are you calling a thief?" she hissed. "I'm describing an action," I replied calmly. "Whoever it applies to knows." Daniel strode forward, his voice sharp. "That's enough, Claire. Do not insult my mother and my sister." I looked at him, feeling strangely calm. I didn't insult anyone first. I'm just stating the facts. The fact is, they came into our room without permission, took my property, ruined it, and then acted like it was nothing. If I stay silent about this today, what will they take tomorrow? He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice was cold. "What do you want?" "I want something very simple," I said. "From now on, no one enters my room without permission. No one touches my things or my daughter's things without asking. And as for this dress, Jessica will pay for it not just to replace it, but to acknowledge what she did." Jessica scoffed. "Fine. I'll pay. How much are you going to demand?" I looked at the rip in the delicate silk and remembered Sarah's words. Asterisk, a gift for the Claire I knew when we were 20. Asterisk, my voice was quiet, but firm. It's not about the price. It's about responsibility. It's about respect. I didn't wait for their response. I walked forward and took hold of Jessica's arm, not yanking it, but with enough pressure for her to understand I was taking back what was mine. "Take it off," I said. "Give it back." She jerked her arm away, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm taking back what belongs to me. You have no right to wear it for another second." Eleanor shrieked. Daniel yelled. But I stood my ground. It wasn't about making a scene. It was because I knew if I was soft now, they would see it as weakness again. Finally, Jessica shoved my hand away, stormed into the bathroom, and a moment later, threw the dress onto the bed like a dirty rag. I picked it up. The silk was cool in my hands, but my heart was burning with a mixture of humiliation and rage. Humiliated because my private space had been so thoroughly violated. Enraged because the one person who should have been on my side saw it all as me being dramatic. I carried the dress and walked straight downstairs. I didn't say another word. Behind me, I could hear Eleanor's insults, Daniel's frustrated sighs, and Jessica's muttering. I went into the kitchen and laid the dress on the table, a tangible piece of evidence of a boundary that had been shattered. This time, there was no feeling of times let's just move past this for the sake of peace asterisk. There was only a cold, clear realization. This family had disrespected me for so long that they had forgotten my silence was not a license for them to do whatever they wanted. I laid the dress on the kitchen table like a piece of evidence. No one in the house could pretend this was a small thing anymore. The dark wine stain and the jagged tear were there for all to see, as crude and violating as the way they had stomped all over my private life. Eleanor stood in the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, her voice like ice. "Are you done with your little performance? Causing all this drama over a single dress?" I wiped my hands on a towel and turned to face her. The trembling from my anger had subsided, replaced by a dry, hollow exhaustion. "Eleanor, it's not about the dress. It's about you and Jessica entering my room and going through my closet without my permission. I've already made it clear. That is a violation." Jessica came down the stairs, now changed into her own clothes, her face still stormy. She bit her lip, and then, right on cue, burst into tears, loud, theatrical sobs that echoed off the walls. "I'm already suffering so much, and now I have to come home to my own mother's house and be humiliated by my sister-in-law. She called me a thief. How am I supposed to live?" I looked at her, my composure unshaken. "Jessica, I didn't humiliate anyone. I described your actions. You took something from my closet without asking, you ruined it, and you acted like it was nothing. That was wrong." Jessica wiped her tears, her tone instantly shifting to defiance. "So, I was wrong. What are you going to do about it? Call the cops? You think you're so clever, don't you? You're going to drag me through the mud in front of everyone just to feel vindicated." Eleanor jumped in, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Did you hear that? She's already down. And you're beating her over the head with right and wrong. A woman with such a vicious tongue will be punished by God one day." I let out a small, mirthless smile. Whether God punishes me or not, I don't know. What I do know is that living in a house without boundaries will, sooner or later, become a living hell. "You dare call this house a hell?" Eleanor's eyes blazed. "I didn't call the house a hell," I said, my voice steady. "I'm talking about the way we treat each other. You can love your daughter, but you don't have the right to use that love as an excuse to make your granddaughter suffer and to demand your daughter-in-law's silence." Eleanor took a step forward, hissing through clenched teeth. "You watch your mouth. You are standing in my son's house." I looked her straight in the eye, not flinching. "You've reminded me of something very important, Eleanor. I am standing in my husband's house. But I am also his wife and Lily's mother. I am not a servant, and I am certainly not a punching bag for anyone to take their frustrations out on." The sound of heavy footsteps came from behind me. Daniel entered the kitchen, his face dark. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask where the dress came from. He didn't see the humiliation it represented. All he saw was his mother and sister being challenged by me. He threw a single question at me. "Are you done? You've taken this far enough." My voice was quiet but sharp. "And you call them going through my private things, taking it too far? This is a family, not a corporation." He shot back. "So Jessica borrowed it. It's done. Why do you have to drag out this right and wrong nonsense and cause chaos?" I looked at my husband, and my heart sank. "So, if tomorrow I borrow your phone, read all your private messages, and then tell you it's a family, would you be okay with that?" He froze, but only for a second before his defensiveness turned to anger. "Don't change the subject. You are speaking to my mother. Do not be disrespectful." Jessica, hiding behind her mother, let out another perfectly timed sniffle, adding fuel to the fire. Eleanor immediately grabbed her daughter's hand and delivered her verdict. "Daniel, look at this. Your wife has no respect for us. If you don't teach her a lesson now, she'll be walking all over you." I heard the words "teach her a lesson" and almost laughed. The only lesson the adults in this house ever wanted to teach was for me to yield, to be silent, to endure. I took a deep breath and spoke with precision. "I don't disrespect anyone. I just refuse to be violated and then be made to feel like I'm the one at fault." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes red with wounded pride. "So what else do you want?" "I want my mother-in-law and sister-in-law to respect boundaries," I said. "And I want you to stand up for what's right. That's all." The phrase "stand up for what's right" seemed to be the final blow to his ego. He let out a harsh laugh. "What's right is always whatever you say, isn't it? You're always right." I shook my head. "No. What's right is not taking other people's things without asking. What's right is not scolding a child for protecting her own property. And what's right is not treating your wife like a communal wallet." At that, Daniel exploded. He grabbed my arm, his grip so tight it made me stumble, nearly hitting the edge of the kitchen counter. I heard Eleanor gasp, Jessica's sobs cease, and the blood rushed to my ears. He yelled, all pretense of civility gone. "What is wrong with you? If you can't serve my mother and my sister, then get the hell out of this house." The words "get the hell out" landed like a hammer blow. I stood perfectly still, not out of fear, but because I had just heard, loud and clear, something I had long suspected. In this man's heart, my only value was in my service to his family. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, then up at his face. Strangely, I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. I just felt a door inside me quietly, definitively click shut. I pulled my arm free and stood up straight. I looked at each of them, in turn, Eleanor, Jessica, and finally, Daniel. My voice, when I spoke, was so calm it surprised even me. "Okay. Divorce." Eleanor scoffed. "Who do you think you're threatening? Without Daniel, you'll be out on the street with your child." Jessica chimed in with a cruel, triumphant laugh. Daniel, however, froze for a half-second before puffing out his chest. "Fine by me. Just don't come crawling back." I nodded slowly. "I'll leave, but not in the way you think." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my steps calm and measured. I didn't need to scream or list my grievances. Sometimes, more words just make you cheaper. I walked straight upstairs to the linen closet in the hallway, where I kept a small, metal lockbox. It was something I hadn't touched in years, because I had wanted to believe I would never need it. The lid popped open, releasing the faint, dusty smell of old paper. I lifted out a file folder. My heart is still as a calm lake. 7 years of endurance, all culminating in this one crystal clear moment. He had chosen to tell me to get out, and I was choosing not to stay and be told a second time. I carried the file folder down the stairs. The staircase suddenly felt longer than usual, not because my legs were shaking, but because a final thread inside me was snapping, the one that had always whispered, "Asterisk. Just try a little longer." Asterisk. The living room was brightly lit. Eleanor was enthroned on the sofa, her arms still crossed, the picture of a wronged matriarch. Jessica sat beside her, her eyes still red but her mouth set in a hard line. like someone who had just finished crying and was now waiting to see justice served. Daniel stood near the window, his back partially to me, trying to project an air of indifference, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. I placed the folder on the coffee table. The soft thud was quiet, but it was enough to make all three of them look. Daniel spoke first, his voice sharp. "What new drama is this?" "No drama," I said calmly. "I'm just doing what you said. I'm getting out. But before I go, there are a few things we need to clear up to avoid any arguments later." Eleanor sniffed dismissively. "What's there to argue about? If you want to leave, just leave. Don't think you can scare us." I looked at her, my face devoid of anger or amusement. I untied the string on the folder and pulled out the first document, the certificate of title for the property. I placed it in the center of the table, turning it so they could read it. "This is the deed to the house," I said. Jessica's eyes, which had been darting around, froze. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Daniel walked over, his eyes narrowing as he read the name of the registered owner. I saw the color drain from his face, as if he'd just been doused with ice water. I pulled out the next document, the original purchase agreement, and the next, the bank statements showing the scheduled payments. I didn't say much, just laid them out, one by one, each sheet of paper like a nail being hammered into place. Daniel picked up one of the papers, turning it over and over. His voice was suddenly hoarse. It's in your name." "My name?" I confirmed. Eleanor shot to her feet, her voice trembling with rage. "What trick is this? Daniel has lived in this house for 7 years. How can you suddenly say it's yours?" My voice remained steady. "The documents are clear. The purchase contract for this house was signed 3 months before Daniel and I were legally married. I'm not suddenly saying anything. I'm just presenting the facts." Jessica frowned, trying to find a loophole. "But Daniel always said this house was part of a corporate housing program for senior executives." "Mom, you heard him say that." I looked at Jessica, my gaze soft but piercing. "You heard what you wanted to hear. The documents, however, speak for themselves. The house is in my name. The cars are in my name." I pulled out the 2 vehicle titles and added them to the pile. Daniel stared at the papers, a vein throbbing in his temple. He stammered, "That's impossible. Your father. He said he was helping us out." I cut him off, my tone even. "My father never said this house was for you. He just chose not to clarify things to protect your pride. You and your family have lived with a sense of entitlement for so long that you started to believe everything you enjoyed actually belonged to you." Eleanor lunged forward, grabbing the papers with a shaking hand, flipping through them as if desperate to find a line she could cling to. "You're a fraud. You hid this. You trapped my son." I didn't flinch or raise my voice to defend myself. I just said, slowly and clearly, "Legally executed documents are not a trap, Eleanor. If I had wanted to trap him, I wouldn't have lived quietly for 7 years. I did it because I wanted a peaceful family, because my daughter needed a father. But my silence did not negate my rights." Jessica suddenly changed her tune, trying to soften the situation. "Claire, we're family. We can talk about this slowly. If you do this, you'll humiliate Daniel." I let out a bitter laugh. Humiliate him? When he grabbed my arm and nearly threw me against the counter. When he told me to get the hell out. Did anyone think about my humiliation then? Or does my dignity only matter when it affects your family's image? Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? You hid this so you could kick my mother and me out." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not kicking anyone out for sport. I am reclaiming what is mine and ensuring a safe environment for my daughter. I'm not the one who was planning. The ones who were planning were demanding $60,000 for cosmetic surgery. The ones who were planning were taking over a child's bedroom. The ones who were planning were going through my closet and calling it family." Daniel was speechless. Eleanor, however, was still defiant. "So, what are you going to do? Throw us out on the street?" "I'm going to file for divorce," I said. "And I am requesting that all individuals who do not have legal ownership of this property gather their personal belongings and leave." Jessica's eyes widened. You would kick out your own mother-in-law?" I looked at her, my voice turning cold. "I am not kicking out a mother-in-law. I am requesting that people who are occupying my legal property, without any respect for my boundaries, leave. As for our relationship, everyone can reflect on their own behavior. You reap what you sow." Eleanor was purple with rage. In a sudden outburst, she swept her arm across the table, sending the documents fluttering to the floor like dry leaves. "I'm not leaving," she shrieked. "This is my son's house." I calmly bent down and picked up each paper, my movements deliberate. "If you won't leave voluntarily," I said, my voice as steady as steel, "then we'll do this legally. I don't want to make a scene in front of my daughter. But if you continue to cause a disturbance, I will call my lawyer and the authorities to file a report." Daniel took a step forward, his voice low and menacing. "You think you've won? You think a piece of paper gives you the right to do whatever you want?" I looked up at him, my gaze unwavering. "I don't want to win against you, Daniel. I just want to make sure that from this day forward, no one ever has the right to trample on me or my daughter again." In the living room, the ticking of the wall clock sounded unnervingly loud. The three people in front of me were suddenly silent, not because they understood, but because the reality of their situation had finally hit them. The dream life they had taken for granted for so long had just been shattered. I gathered the papers, placed them back in the folder, and tied the string, as if closing a chapter of my life. I stood up, my voice even. "You have until tonight to pack your personal belongings. Tomorrow, I will be meeting with my lawyer. As for how to depart in a way that is both legal and dignified, I will leave that choice up to you." I said nothing more. I just turned and walked up the stairs to my daughter's room. Seeing Lily asleep, my heart softened. Out there, they could scream, they could cry, they could rage. But in that moment, all I felt was a single, clear purpose. Some mothers stand up not for revenge, but to ensure that their children will never have to bow their heads in their own home again. The moment I reached the top of the stairs, the sound of glass shattering echoed from downstairs. It wasn't the sound of cleaning up. It was the sound of pure rage. I stood on the landing and listened. I could hear Eleanor's shrill voice. "I'm not leaving. I've lived here for 7 years. I've earned the right to be here." Jessica's voice was sharper, like salt in a wound. "She wants to throw us out on the street so the whole world can laugh at us. That woman is a snake." Then came Daniel's voice, heavy and menacing. "She's pushed it this far. She'd better not blame me for what comes next." I took a deep breath and went into the room where Lily was sleeping. She was still asleep, but her face was scrunched up as if in a bad dream. My heart ached. I knew if I went down there to confront them, the shouting would escalate and wake her. For a child, fear doesn't require a physical blow. The sound of angry adult voices is enough to leave a lasting scar. I closed her door softly and stepped back into the hallway, pulling out my phone. This time, I wasn't calling anyone to complain. I was calling my lawyer, Mr. David Chin. He answered immediately, his voice calm. "Claire, what's the situation?" I explained it concisely. "The three of them are refusing to leave and are becoming agitated. I'm concerned for my daughter's safety and for my property." Mr. Chin was direct. "Do not engage with them. Stay calm. We just need to have the situation officially documented. I'll have someone from my office head over. And in the meantime, you should call your local police department or the homeowners association to have someone witness the events. It needs to be handled by the book." "Okay," I said. I went downstairs. The living room was in chaos. Eleanor was standing in the middle of the room, her eyes red, gesturing wildly. Jessica was slumped on the sofa, clutching her designer handbag as if someone were about to snatch it. Daniel was pacing, his face a thundercloud. The moment they saw me, Eleanor lunged forward. "Who are you calling? Are you trying to bring outsiders in here to humiliate this family?" I didn't get drawn into the argument. I just stated the facts. "I have called my lawyer, and I am notifying the local authorities to come and file a report, as you are causing a disturbance on my legal property." Daniel's eyes widened. "Are you insane? You'll make this a public spectacle." I looked him straight in the eye. "You're afraid of a public spectacle, but you're not afraid of your own child hearing words like, 'Get out' and 'freeloader' every day." I'm choosing a clean, orderly process. No shouting, no fighting, just the law." Jessica jumped up and grabbed her mother's arm. "Don't be scared, Mom. She's just bluffing. Who can she kick out? You're the mother-in-law." I looked at Jessica, my voice cold. "A title doesn't make a wrong a right, Jessica. If you want to stay, you need to provide a legal basis. If you don't have one, pack your things." In a fit of rage, Eleanor grabbed a picture frame from a shelf and raised it as if to smash it. I moved quickly, not to wrestle it from her, but to block it with my own body. "Don't do that," I said, my voice low but firm. "There is a child in this house. You smash one thing, and that sound will scare her for the rest of her life." She hesitated for a second, But then, with a defiant cry, she swept a row of decorative books off the shelf. The sharp thud as they hit the floor made my heart leap into my throat. I didn't wait any longer. I went to the door and called the number for our HOA's security patrol, and then the non-emergency line for the local police, requesting assistance for a domestic disturbance. I explained the situation clearly and factually. There was a dispute over occupancy of my legally owned property, and I needed an official presence to prevent escalation. Within half an hour, 2 police officers and a representative from the HOA arrived. Mr. Chen was also there, accompanied by 2 security personnel from our community's management, who stood discreetly by the gate and in the driveway to ensure no one acted rashly or attempted to remove property that wasn't their own. The moment the authorities were present, Eleanor's tone changed completely. The shrieking stopped, and she transformed into a weeping victim. "Officers, you have to see what's happening. My daughter-in-law tricked my son, and now she's throwing his own mother out on the street." Mr. Chin didn't engage in the melodrama. He simply opened his file and presented the legal documents to the officers. He kept his statement to the point. The property is legally owned by Miss Claire Thompson, acquired prior to her marriage. The other parties are causing a disturbance. We are requesting that an official report be filed and that the non-resident individuals be instructed to collect their personal belongings and vacate the premises to restore order. The police officers were professional and by the book. They asked everyone to remain calm and to refrain from destroying property. They documented the state of the living room, the scattered books, the tense atmosphere. I signed the report, my hands steady. Strangely, in that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was just doing what had to be done. Daniel, his face pale, tried to argue. "I'm her husband. I've lived in this house for years. I've contributed." Mr. Chin's reply was clinical. "Contribution to household expenses does not confer ownership rights, sir. If you wish to contest ownership, you may do so through the proper legal channels in court. At present, however, you do not have the right to cause a disturbance here." Eleanor cried. Jessica cried. But their tears no longer had the power to move me. All I could think about was Lily, upstairs, and how one more crash could shatter her sense of security. I just wanted it to be over. Finally, under the watchful eyes of the police, they were compelled to pack. Jessica dragged her suitcases out, her face a mask of hatred. Eleanor muttered curses under her breath as she left. Daniel was silent, the heavy silence of a man who had just lost something he had always believed was irrevocably his. That night, after they were gone, I watched the iron gate swing shut. I didn't feel the triumph I might have expected. I just felt a quiet lightness, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from my chest. But life rarely grants you immediate, total peace. A few days later, I heard they had moved back to the cramped, pre-war apartment in a less fashionable part of the city where they had all lived before. The fall from a grand suburban home to a small, stuffy apartment fueled their bruised egos. And when ego is on the line, people retaliate. Jessica encouraged Daniel to file for divorce, demanding half of the appreciated value of the house and, to my horror, full custody of Lily. Their argument was that he had a stable career and had supported the family, while I, as a stay-at-home mother, was not equipped to provide for our child. I read the legal papers and laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. They could come after my money, that I could understand. But to come after my child, that was a line no one was allowed to cross. I stood in front of the mirror, pulled my hair back into a tight, neat bun, and looked myself in the eye. The woman staring back was not the same woman from 7 years ago. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the real fight had only just begun. Daniel's divorce petition arrived swiftly. He demanded a share of the house's appreciated value and full custody of Lily, painting a picture of himself as the dedicated provider father and me as a dependent homemaker. I held the papers, and my hands were steady. What used to make me tremble was the sound of a raised voice in my kitchen, the cold glare of my mother-in-law, the crushing silence of my husband. A legal document, by contrast, couldn't yell or manipulate. It only dealt in facts. Mr. Chen, my lawyer, was direct in our first strategy session. "Claire, we need to be clear from the start. Our priority is Lily's best interest. The property issue is straightforward, but they will attack you on the basis that you're a stay-at-home mom, implying you're less capable." I nodded. I understood. People could call me stingy. They could call me cold. But when it came to my daughter, I would not yield an inch. A few days later, my friend Sarah called. her voice low. "Claire, I just saw Daniel at a hotel downtown with a woman. I'm not 100% sure, but they looked very close." I was silent for a long time. The truth was, I'd had my suspicions for years. The late-night calls he had to take outside, the unusually frequent business trips, the unexplained expenses he brushed off as client entertainment. I had told myself that's just how business was. I was afraid of being paranoid, of overthinking things. Only now did I realize that often, a woman isn't oblivious. She's just choosing to deceive herself because she needs a reason to stay. On my lawyer's advice, I began to carefully and legally gather evidence. And then I saw the unvarnished truth. Daniel had been seeing his college ex-girlfriend, Megan, for a long time. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a sustained affair, hidden under the guise of work. But what chilled me to the bone wasn't the infidelity itself. It was an audio recording where I heard Daniel telling Megan, his voice casual and calculating, "We'll just threaten to take custody. Claire will be so scared of losing her daughter, she'll fold. And hey, if the court actually gives her to me, we can just enroll her in a good boarding school. She won't be in the way." I listened, and I couldn't cry. I just felt sick to my stomach. A man could betray his wife, but to speak of his own child as an inconvenience, an object to be sent away so she won't be in the way what was left of the man I thought I had married. At the first mediation session, Daniel's family put on a masterful performance. My mother-in-law wept as she recounted her sacrifices. Jessica sat beside her, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Daniel spoke of 7 years of love and commitment, and of his shock at being deceived about the house he thought was his. I sat in silence and let them have their say. People are often like that. The more wrong they are, the more they talk, as if a flood of words can wash away the truth. When it was my lawyer's turn, Mr. Chen didn't engage with the emotional drama. He simply presented the facts. The house was premarital property, purchased with funds from my personal trust account. Major maintenance costs had also been paid from my funds. Minor contributions, like fixing a leaky faucet or changing a light bulb, did not constitute a claim to ownership. Everything was as clear as day. When the discussion turned to custody, their lawyer argued that I would now be too busy establishing a new life to care for Lily while Daniel had stable means. Mr. Chen asked Daniel a few simple questions. What is Lily allergic to? What is her favorite bedtime story? What is she most afraid of during a thunderstorm? What was the name of her kindergarten teacher last year? Daniel stammered, his eyes darting around the room. He couldn't answer, not because he was unintelligent, but because he had never truly been present in his daughter's life. He was a figure in the house, but the intimate details of her life, her sleep patterns, her favorite foods, her fevers, her tears were all things he had outsourced to me. At the next session, we submitted our key piece of evidence, the audio recording. The room fell silent. I saw Eleanor's face go white. Perhaps for the first time, she realized her son wasn't just entitled. He was cold enough to use his own daughter as a bargaining chip. Jessica stared at the floor, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Her once sharp, biting words had nowhere to go. The final court hearing was shorter than I had anticipated. The judge granted the divorce. The house was confirmed as my sole and separate property, and Daniel's claim for a share was dismissed as baseless. Full physical and legal custody of Lily was granted to me. Daniel was ordered to pay child support based on his income and was granted supervised visitation, with the strict condition that it not cause any psychological distress to our daughter. Walking out of the courthouse, I didn't feel like I had won. I felt like I had escaped. Escaped from a family that saw my sacrifice as their due. Escaped from a husband who used the word family as a cage to keep me silent. In the months that followed, Megan disappeared from Daniel's life as quickly as she had appeared. Eleanor and Jessica were left in their cramped apartment, their lives filled with the friction and resentment of their new reality. Jessica still craved a life of glamour, but there was no one left to fund her new beginning. As for Daniel, he had lost his home, his reputation, and the polished veneer that had earned him so much praise. Some consequences aren't paid in a courtroom. They're paid by having the world finally see you for who you truly are. I repainted Lily's room. I put her bookshelf back, set up her drawing corner, and bought her a brand new, professional-grade watercolor set. One afternoon, we sat on the floor together, coloring in her drawing of our house. She looked up at me and asked, "Mommy, is our house peaceful now?" I pulled her into a hug. "Yes, sweetie, it is, because Mommy will never let anyone make you feel scared here again." The lesson I learned from all of this was simple. In a marriage, patience and compromise are not wrong. But when you are patient to the point of erasing your own boundaries, you and your children will be the ones who pay the price. A home is only worth saving if it is built on a foundation of respect, safety, and fairness. Anything less is just a beautiful house, cold and empty on the inside.